businesses and individuals all across America. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Texas.
Madam President, we have had a monumental decision from the Supreme Court of the United States, and I have to say I am disappointed because while the opinion is not very clear in many respects, the result is clear, and that is that we are getting ready to see one of the largest tax increases in the history of our country, because we're all talking about the fact that the Supreme Court has declared the Obama health care plan constitutional. But let's look at how it was declared unconstitutional. It was not based on the commerce powers of the United States Congress and the Constitution. It was based instead on taxing capabilities, the taxing power of the United States Congress. Now, I want to read excerpts from an interview that George Stephanopoulos did with President Obama. Under this mandate, Stephanopoulos says, the government is forcing people to spend money, fining you if you don't. How is that not a tax? President Obama replies, no, that's not true, George. For us to say that you've got to take a responsibility to get health insurance is absolutely not a tax increase. Stephanopoulos goes on later to say, but you reject that it's a tax increase. President Obama replies, I absolutely reject that notion. And yet, the court today said this is constitutional because of Congress's power to tax. So we're going to see the tax increase go forward, and the small businesses and the businesses that are looking at this, the individuals, are going to have a whopping increase in the cost of doing business at a time when I certainly don't have to point out that we are in an economic downturn, when the private sector is not hiring, when we have an over 8% unemployment rate, and yet now we see more costs on top of what we already have in this country, and I don't think that is the recipe for getting this country going again and hiring people to work. I'd like to read a few quotes from employers on the impact of the Obama health care plan on their businesses. Scott Womack, who is the president and owner of Womack Restaurants, is an IHOP franchisee. He said, let me state bluntly, this law will cost my company more than we make. Grady Payne, the CEO of Connor Industries. Very interesting, because Connor Industries is headquartered in my home state of Texas with plants in 8 different states. Connor Industries started in 1981 with 5 people and 1 location. Today, they have grown to 450 employees and 11 plant locations. They offer health coverage to their employees, and the company pays over half of the total premium cost. In 2014, the company will have to choose how to comply with this law that is now on the books officially as constitutional. They will have to either buy a more expensive government-approved health care benefit or drop health coverage completely and pay the $2,000 fine for each of their employees. Thus, Mr. Payne has stated that the impact of this law will cost them over $1 million no matter what option they choose. Medical devices the CEO of Medical Devices Tax Hinders Innovation in an op-ed. I'm sorry, it's the chairman and CEO of NuVasive, a medical device company in San Diego, said provisions of the Affordable Health Care Act are destroying jobs, hindering innovation, and slowing economic recovery. To offset the medical device tax increase, we will be forced to reduce investments in research and development and cut up to 200 planned new jobs next year. So what we have seen today is a validation of what many of us were concerned about when this law was going through Congress, and that is the enormous increase in the tax, the fine, and the overall burdens to the businesses of this country would do several things that are not good for the people of our country. It will increase costs to American consumers. It will inject the government into doctor-patient relationships. It will most certainly add new burdens on business in an environment in which we have over 8% unemployment. And I think it is very clear that though the President promised that you will be able to keep your health care coverage as you know it, that health care coverage is not going to be there because so many companies are going to drop the health care coverage that they have been offering because it is too expensive to comply with the government conscription of the plan that is required in order to avoid the $2,000 fine. So I think what the court said is insightful in this respect, and that is that while they said this law is constitutional based on the taxing power of Congress, they are not ruling on the wisdom nor the fairness of the policy. Well, I think it's going to come down, Mr. President, to the people of our country, because the election this year is going to determine the ultimate fate of this bill. The Republican nominee, Governor Mitt Romney, has said very clearly on the first day that he is sworn into office, he will ask for the repeal of this health care law. I think it will become an issue in every contested congressional race and every Senate race. Are you going to vote to keep this law that has been ruled constitutional based on the fact that it is a taxing power of Congress, and the people will be able to decide? Do they want this jolt on their health care? Do they want the extra costs? Do they want the intrusion on the patient-doctor relationship? And do they want to possibly lose the coverage that they have and be taxed to go into another plan, a government plan? We are going to see the erosion of the quality of health care in this country if we are not able to repeal this law and start all over. Now, I will say that the purpose of passing health care reform is to provide more options for people to get affordable health care coverage. I think that is a worthy goal. I think we should go for that goal in a way that does not burden the economy of our country, stop employers from employing people, in a way that preserves the doctor-patient relationship and doesn't intrude on the people who do have coverage that they want to keep. That should be our goal. Mr. President, there are several months before the election. I hope that we will be able to do something in this Congress to start a new process of providing affordable health care options for the people of our country and not continue on this path of enormous tax increases, which have been validated by the court, as well as an intrusion on the quality of our health care, and something that in the bigger picture is going to keep our businesses from hiring more people to get the economy jump-started, that should be every one of our goals. I hope that we can work on this in a productive way before the election, but I also, Mr. President, hope that the people will make the final decision in the election. If Congress has not acted before, that we will have a decisive election that will say, we can do better. We, the people of the strongest country on earth, can do better than a health care system that will be eventually turned over to the government if we go down this path. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. President,
Senator from Louisiana,
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the roll call.
without objection.
Mr. President, there are so many important things going on in Washington today, it's hard to know what to speak on first. But I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about flood insurance. One of the reasons is because there are 3 states in the Union that carry the most policies relative to our population. And that would be, well, and maybe the most policies regardless of our population. That would be Florida, number 1, Texas, number 2, Louisiana, number 3, and of course, California, number 4. So while this bill affects everyone in the country, the 4 states that it affects the most, and by far, are the 4 states that I mentioned, and Louisiana happens to be one. So the people of my state pay a lot of attention to flood insurance. We always have, and we always will have to. And Mr. President, I'm sorry to say that just within the last few hours, with so many things changing around here at the last minute, that I just was given the information that the flood insurance bill, which we have not even debated on the floor of the Senate, is now going to be put into an omnibus package, which includes many other important things. The transportation bill, the Restore Act, which is also important for the Gulf Coast, parts of it that were accepted by the House, and there were few important parts that were unfortunately left on the cutting room floor over in the House, and now the flood insurance bill. And I want to make it clear that if I was called on to vote on the flood insurance bill that is now going to be a part of this package, I would vote no. Because there are some very important provisions that I was going to offer as amendments to the bill that I think are crucial to not just my state, but to the state of Florida, potentially to the state of California, and potentially to Texas as well. And I'm not sure that their senators are in complete agreement or understand some of the challenges here, but I want to point a few of them out. Unfortunately, I'm not going to get a chance to vote no because I'm either going to have to vote for the whole package, which I intend to do, although this flood insurance bill is not in the position that I would support. And let me give you 3 reasons. 1, there's a provision of the bill, and I'm going to need the staff to come help. There's a provision of the bill that talks about V-zones. It's called velocity zones. And right now with FEMA basically says that if you're in a velocity zone, you can't rebuild. Well, Mr. President, I've got St. Bernard Parish, Plaquemine Parish, Lafourche Parish, Terrebonne Parish, Cameron Parish, and large sections of St. Tammany and St. John the Baptist and Orleans Parish that, as you can see, are designated V-zones. This means likely to be flooded, not just based on their elevation, but the way that the historical patterns of storms coming out of the Gulf affects them. And I understand that we have to be very, very careful in these areas, so I had an amendment to say, no, you can rebuild, but you have to build up to the right elevation, or you have to rebuild according to, the highest standards. If we don't fix this and this bill passes, which it looks like it will, there are going to be great concerns or questions, if not a downright prohibition, on building in these areas regardless of whether you pay insurance or not. This is not right. The other amendment that I was prepared to offer is an affordability amendment. People may not realize this, and I hope that the members will be listening. Again, this bill affects all the states. Ben, will you stand there for me, please? Affects all of the states. But in the underlying bill, there's a provision that allows these rates for everyone in the country to be increased by 15% a year. Now, people are really struggling to pay flood insurance now. I think that's very steep. People that are arguing for the 15% a year increase say that it's important to get this program actuarially sound. It is currently running a $20 billion deficit. I am well aware of the need to get this program in line, but I was going to offer an amendment that simply created and expanded a small but important affordability provision of $10 million that the department would have to help people on fixed incomes or lower middle-income families that, of course, are working along the Gulf Coast and in some of these coastal areas. They're not sunbathing, not vacationing. This isn't about second homes. This is about primary homes. They have a right and have been generations living near the coast, either fishermen, et cetera. An affordability amendment that now I can't offer, I will file for the record. This is a very important issue. Flood insurance is not just about business and commerce. It's about culture. It's about a way of life. It's about preserving coastal communities. It's about being resilient in storms. And yes, Louisiana wants to pay its fair share. Florida must pay its fair share. Texas must pay its fair share. We have no problem and have been for years. Some members are now waking up and saying, oh my goodness, now you're telling us, people in other parts of the country, we have to buy flood insurance, but we have a levy. You're telling us we have to buy flood insurance? Well, yes, we've had levees in Louisiana for 200 years. Unfortunately, they break. Sometimes when the federal government doesn't build them correctly, they disintegrate and our people get flooded. And yes, we've had levees, we pay to build the levees, and we pay for insurance, and we're still not as protected as we could be. And again, we're not sunbathing down here on this coast. We are producing oil and gas for the nation. We're running the largest port system in North America, and we drain 40% of the continent. Now, Florida has a little different situation. They do a great deal of tourism, and they do a great deal of sunbathing and other things, and I'm happy for Florida and their economies, but the people that I represent are not running huge vacation operations. This is not an optional place for us to live. It's not optional for us, it's not optional for the nation, and it's not optional for the world. And we have to find an affordable and safe way to live here. So I had an amendment to try to make this more affordable. That amendment is not going to be offered. The only positive thing that I can say about the bill, and there are some positive things, and this is important, I know, to the realtors. I support them almost 100%, and the home builders. I've got a very good record with the realtors and the home builders, and I believe in what they do, and they're right when they say we have to have a permanent extension because we can't close deals. People can't sell their homes. We have to have this insurance program, and they are correct. And so, like a lot of things up here, it's a balance. With the amendments that I was going to put on the bill and actually had worked out to do so, on balance, the bill would have been better, and I was prepared to vote for it on the floor. Now that it's being stuck into this package without the debate on the floor and without the amendments, I must go on record to say that I would vote against the bill in its current form. Even though I know we need long-term flood insurance because of the increased rates, the lack of the affordability, and the lack of the fix to the V-zones, I think that it just tips the balance against the bill generally. There's nothing I can do about it. That's the way it's going to happen. But I wanted to submit my comments for the record. And I can promise the members of this Senate, after this bill goes into effect, you're going to hear a lot of complaints from your constituents, and I am certain that we will be back here within the year after the elections, regardless of who wins and who loses, fixing some provisions that should have been fixed, but because there's not going to be a debate on the Senate floor, will not be. And I know that this bill came out of the Banking Committee in the Senate with bipartisan support. I am well aware of that. but I think there were some corrections or some perfections that could have been done on the Senate floor. We're not going to get that opportunity, and I thank the chair, suggest the absence of a quorum, and put my other statement into the record.
Without objection. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President, you raised the absence of quorum and ask if John Belarnos can come to the floor, please. Ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Will the senator renew her request for floor privileges?
John Belarnos.
Without objection.
That's the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Ms. Ayotte.
President.
Senator from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that I be allowed to speak as of in morning business.
The Senate is in a quorum call.
I ask that unanimous consent that the quorum call be suspended and that I be recognized to speak as of in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President, for this opportunity to speak. As we know, the Supreme Court today ruled on the health care law, and we've gotten a lot of phone calls and emails. People want to know what this means. Above the politics, I think sometimes you're in Washington, everything's analyzed over what does this mean in the elections, what does this mean for the Republicans or for the Democrats. So what I hope to do today here by coming to the floor of the Senate is respond to some of my constituents from Florida and folks from around the country that have called as well to find out what this means in the real life and what my position is towards it moving forward. And so that's what I hope to do here today in the few minutes that I have while the Senate waits on the pending matter. Let's first begin by understanding what's happened today. The Supreme Court, what the Supreme Court does is it doesn't decide whether something's a good idea or a bad idea. The Supreme Court's job is to decide whether something is constitutional. And today, by a vote of 5-4, 4 of them disagreed, but 5 of the justices, including the Chief Justice, decided that at least a key component of the health care law that passed here before I was elected was constitutional. But it was constitutional, they said, because it was under the taxing powers of the Congress. In essence, they said that this mandate, this requirement, is constitutional because it is a tax. Now, that's curious, of course, because the President denied it was a tax. I looked it up. Remember the specific interview that he gave a few months while this was being debated, where he was asked by George Stephanopoulos on ABC, wasn't this a tax? And he denied it. He denied it and said that there was no way this was a tax. In fact, if I could find the right quote in here, to make sure I'm not misquoting anybody in this day and age of fact-checking, the President specifically said that the notion that it was a tax was wrong. So, but months later, when this appears before the Supreme Court of the United States, his lawyers argue that, no, this is constitutional because this falls within the power of the government to tax. So that's important because that's the reason why this law still stands on the books today. Let's remind ourselves when we talk about a mandate, this is not a mandate that the government provides you insurance. This is a mandate that you find insurance yourself. And for a mandate to work, and this is by admissions of anyone who's ever been for a mandate, they will admit this to you, that for the mandate to work, the penalty for not buying insurance has to be severe enough so that you will decide to buy the insurance. Otherwise, people will just pay the fine and not get the insurance. So what does this mean in the real world? Well, first of all, what it means in the lives, I found a blog post from 2009. The numbers may have changed a little bit. I'm not 100% sure. But this is what, when the House was deliberating at the time, an economist took this up on July 14, 2009, and he actually used a couple of real-world examples. This may be very similar to you, so listen carefully. The first example he uses of a gentleman, single, earns about $50,000 a year, which is 4 times the federal poverty level, so he wouldn't qualify for the subsidies under the bill. Now, he's single, 50-year-old non-smoker, small business employee. That means he works for a small business that doesn't provide health insurance and isn't required to, because the law requires businesses that have more than 50 employees to provide insurance. Let's say he works at a place that has 5 employees. They're not required to offer you health insurance. So he's 50 years old. He works at a small business that's not required to offer you insurance. He makes $50,000 a year before taxes. He doesn't have insurance. Now, he cannot afford a bare-bones policy. And this economist went through ehealthinsurance.com, and he found that the cheapest policy he could find was about $1,600 a year. Now, $50,000 before taxes, when you start taking out the taxes, depending on where in the country you live and all these sorts of things, it doesn't add up to a lot of money. This is middle class. He can't afford a $1,600 a year policy. And so instead, he would have to pay a $1,150 fine, which is a tax. That's what he would have to pay. And guess what? Even after paying the $1,100, he still doesn't have insurance. This is the real-world impact of the mandate. Here's another example. This one actually uses my home state, so I picked this one. A married couple, 2 kids. They have a small business. They run a tourist shop in Orlando, Florida. I'm not sure if this is a real person or a hypothetical, but I like the fact they picked Orlando, Florida, so let's use that. Small tourist shop in Orlando, Florida. Their small business, husband and wife, $90,000 a year. That's what it makes. Again, before taxes. If you have a small business, $90,000, between all the expenses you have and all the other tax components that come up, it's middle class. This is middle class, okay? 2 employees. But their wages exceed the amounts that would qualify for the small business tax credit. So, because their business is so small, there would be no financial penalty for the business that only has 2 employees, but as individuals, they still have to buy health insurance for themselves and for their family. So here they are, husband and wife, 40 years old, 2 kids. They own the small tourist shop. They're the only employees making $90,000 a year together. They can't find the cheapest insurance they can get is a high-deductible plan, about $6,000 a year of annual deductible. That costs them about $3,800 a year. The fine is $2,000 a year. And so that's probably what they end up having to do now. This is a $2,000 increase in their taxes through a fine. And they still don't have insurance to show for it. This is the third example I want to give you, and this one's not part of the analysis. But I pointed out to you the fact that the law now requires any business with more than 50 employees, full-time employees, to offer health insurance. Now, offering health insurance is a good thing. We should try to encourage that and provide opportunities for business to do it. But imagine if you're one of these businesses now, and you're asking yourself, I wonder if I should hire the 51st employee or the 55th employee. Should I grow my business? Well, as a result of this new mandate, maybe you decide not to now. How much will this cost us? It's $2,000 per employee if we don't comply. How much will this, over 30? How much does this cost us? Maybe this is not the year to add a few jobs. Even worse, maybe they'll decide, you know what, maybe we should become a part-time business. You know where I hear a lot about this? I heard a lot about it in my campaign. Franchises. You know, the Taco Bells and the McDonald's, those aren't owned necessarily by McDonald's or Taco Bell. They're owned by a small business owner who maybe has 1 or 2 of these businesses. They're going to decide to make everybody part-time because they can't afford to pay the fine and they can't afford to provide the insurance. So this would be a bad idea no matter what the economy is, because now you're discouraging them from growing their business. No matter what our economy looked like, this would be a bad idea. But let me tell you why it's worse. Number one, guess who gets to enforce all this stuff? Guess who you have to answer to? Guess who you have to prove to that you have insurance? Your neighborhood-friendly IRS. That's who's in charge of enforcing this. Millions of Americans now have an IRS problem because they don't have health insurance. And this idea that they don't have health insurance, because if you read some of these statements and these interviews that the President gave when he said it wasn't a tax, it makes it sound like some of these people are just, they don't want to buy insurance. They want to use the money for something else, that they're irresponsible. They're not irresponsible. They can't afford it. There isn't a vibrant private market for them to buy insurance because they can only buy insurance from their state. So if they live in Florida and there's some company in California that wants to sell them insurance, too bad, you can't buy it. It's ridiculous. That's what we should be changing here. These people aren't doing it because they don't want to be responsible. They can't afford it. Their house is upside down. They're making half as much and working twice as long. Their kids want to go to college. Everything's gotten more expensive, gas, milk, their water bill, the electricity bill. And on top of that, we're going to hit them with this? We just got a report today. The economy barely grew in the first 3 months of this year, less than 2%. Our economy is not growing. And when it's not growing, the debt gets worse, the unemployment gets worse, everything gets worse. We shouldn't be doing anything in Washington that makes it harder for people to grow this economy. Why would we do something like this to people? Why would we hit the owner of a tourist shop with a $2,000 a year tax? Or else the IRS is going to chase you around. Why would we hit this guy who's 50 years old trying to make a living in the world working for a small business? Why would we hit him with a $1,000 a year tax if we're trying to grow our economy? Look, health insurance is a real problem. It is. I wish more Americans could get their health insurance the way Congress gets it. You know how we get it? It's very simple. We get to choose, depending on which state you're from, 8 to 10 companies. And you can decide you want a higher co-payment, you pay less premium, and vice versa. You get to choose. Most Americans don't have that choice. They get their insurance from their job, and their job tells them, this is our insurance plan, pick a doctor out of this book. That's the kinds of things we should be working on. And so, apart from everything else, this is a terrible idea because it hurts our ability to grow our economy. This is the real-life impact of this bill. This is the impact this is going to have, and you're going to see it. You're going to see it in a further downturn in our economy, in more slowing in economic growth. This is going to have a real impact. This is a big deal. People across this country and across Florida have every right and every reason to be worried about the impact that this is going to have on them. My friends, this is a middle-class tax increase. And millions of Americans now have an IRS problem. You will now have to, for the first time in American history, prove that you have health insurance or you're going to have to deal with the IRS. I guarantee you that's not good for small business. I guarantee you that's not good for the middle class. I guarantee you that's not good for economic growth. That's where we're at today. And if there's anything I hope we can do here, I wasn't here when the health care bill passed. But I hope some of my colleagues who voted for this will think to themselves, this is never what we intended. We want to help people that are uninsured, but not like this. This is never what we wanted to do. I hope that enough reasonable minds will come together to either suspend or repeal this, and let's start from scratch. Let's come up with a real plan to deal with the health insurance crisis in America. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield.
Mr. President. Senator from Nebraska.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, today marks one of the most historic and certainly highly anticipated Supreme Court decisions in a long time. I would be less than candid if I didn't say that I'm enormously disappointed that the Court upheld the law in its individual mandate, which requires all Americans, to purchase government-approved insurance, whether they choose to or don't choose to. I believe it is fundamentally wrong for the United States government to intervene in the lives of Americans in this very, very direct way. However, the Supreme Court's role within our system of government is to interpret the Constitution, and they have spoken. So with the ruling now officially out, what's really important is where we go from here. Now, the Court did not decide today that this law is good policy. In fact, Chief Justice Roberts went out of his way to clarify this point. It's clear in my mind that we must do everything we can to repeal this flawed law because it is enormously bad policy. While we've waited over 2 years for the final decision about this law's constitutionality, we haven't had to wait that long to learn why the law is bad for America. The law was a train wreck from the very beginning. Backroom deals, empty promises, political tactics that epitomize what disgusts Americans about their government. Some of the law's leading supporters even admitted that they hadn't read the 2,700-page bill. The Speaker acknowledged that we're going to have to pass the law to see what's in it. My colleagues across the aisle hastily passed the bill on the notion that there were some gold nuggets in there tucked inside the law, and that maybe Americans would think that they were lucky enough to cash in. Well, we've come to know that nothing could be further from the truth. After more than 2 years, there's been a lot of rain, but not a single rainbow, and certainly no pot of gold when it comes to this legislation. Instead, what we have seen is one broken promise after another. Just last week, the administration's own Medicare actuary reported national health spending will increase at an average of more than 50% over the next decade. The same analysis estimated in 2014 the increase in private health insurance premiums is expected to accelerate to 7.9%. But the startling fact is that's more than twice the increase Americans would have faced in the absence of the health care law. This is just one of many studies that indicate the law does not bend the cost curve down as the President promised. It begs the basic question, why would Congress pass a massive overhaul of our country's health care system that actually increases the cost of care? It's so ironic that the majority decided to call this health care law the Affordable Care Act. You can hardly argue that more people will receive better care under a plan that drives costs upward and also puts Medicare on an unsustainable path. The Medicare actuary asserted in the most recent trustees report that the law could lead to significant access issues for beneficiaries under Medicare, and Medicare itself is estimated to be insolvent by 2024. Due to the cuts to Medicare and the health care law, he said, and I am quoting, "The prices paid by Medicare for health services are very likely to fall increasingly short of the cost of providing those services," unquote. He goes on to say, and again I'm quoting, "Severe problems with beneficiary access to care," unquote, will occur. Well, that's just another way of saying, to put it very directly and simply, our seniors are going to find it harder and harder to find a doctor or a hospital that will accept them as patients. To put it simply, our seniors are going to have difficulty accessing medical care under this law. The health care law perpetuates the problems within this very, very difficult system. It is clear heavy-handed government solutions aren't the answer. But that's exactly what this law creates. In this law, there are 159 new boards, over 13,000 pages of new regulations, and it gives the Secretary of Health and Human Services more than 1,700 new or expanded powers. No one will convince me that that isn't a seizure of our government, of our health care system, and putting it under the power of government. Americans don't want government bureaucrats diagnosing and prescribing their care. They want the freedom to choose an insurance plan that covers their needs and to just simply see the doctor of their choice. It seems the President even manipulated this sentiment, which is why he said no fewer than 47 different times, quote, "If you like your plan, you can keep it," unquote. Well, he knew that that pledge would help him gain support for his law, but sadly, the American public was misled, and his promise can't be kept. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates up to 20 million Americans, 20 million Americans could lose the insurance they get through work, the insurance that they like and want to keep because of this health care law. And families in 17 states, including my own state of Nebraska, no longer have access to the child-only health insurance because of the mandates of this misguided legislation. And that's not the only way the law will hurt hardworking American families. The director of the CBO testified that the new law will mean 800,000 fewer jobs over the next decade. The American people deserve more than a laundry list of flawed policies and empty pledges. Americans deserve step-by-step reform instead of rushed policy. Transparent reforms, not a 2,700-page entangled mess, and an open debate, not a closed-door discussion and the backroom deals that were so necessary to get this flawed piece of legislation passed. More than anything, they deserve sound policy that delivers on the promises. I will do everything I can to continue to push to repeal this misguided law and to push for policies that set us on a right course. Because the path we pave will define our future as a nation. There is no disputing that Medicare and Medicaid are two of the biggest drivers of our nation's $15 trillion debt. So if we want to secure a sound future for our children and our grandchildren, we have to fundamentally reform these government programs, not double down on policies that will bankrupt them. In that same vein, we can't ignore our struggling economy. Instead, we need policies that promote business growth and job creation. You see, I believe we can pass step-by-step reforms that confront these tough issues and policies that depart from a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach. The issue of health care touches all of us at the deepest level. Whether it's a new life entering into our world, a tough diagnosis, a life-saving surgery, or care for a loved one in their final days, health care decisions should not be dictated by Washington. Families and the physician that they trust need to be at the heart of the decisions that impact their health. The Supreme Court has spoken definitively about the constitutionality of this law, but Americans have spoken loud and clear when it comes to the sensibility of this process and of this policy. It's time to repeal it and put in place sensible reforms that truly do bring down costs. Madam President, I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.